Very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning. As always, we start off with the tips to continually prevent COVID-19. That is to wash your hands regularly for 20 seconds with soap and water. If this is not available to you, please use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. If you haven't been able to wash your hands, please avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. And then adhere to social distancing, especially if people are sick. Try and avoid close contact with them. Cover your cough or sneeze with a flexed elbow or tissue and then throw that into the bin. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects and surfaces, including your tools. And please do your part to get vaccinated. Now we move on to our October Toolbox Talks. That is inclement weather. We'll be looking at heat next week, Legionella, and then we have changed up housekeeping for the new OHS Act bill that is going to be coming into play over the next year. Obviously, it will be put into commentary, so it will go out for everybody to be able to comment on and decide if there's something that you are happy with, something you're not happy with, and maybe an amendment you want to make. So if that does come out, we encourage you to please read it, take a look at it. We will also have a Toolbox Talk once it's released, as well as perhaps maybe an article that explains how the new OHS Act bill is going to affect our member plumbers. But we will keep you up to date. We'll just let you know about the new act that is coming out and what it's going to be a little bit about and how it's going to affect you in the interim. And that is just the idea of what is currently there. We cannot say for certain exactly what is going to be in this new OHS Act bill at the moment. So today we are looking at inclement weather. Now, what is inclement weather? Well, these are weather conditions that obviously can create serious danger on site. Things like severe weather storms. You can have electrical storms, especially like we have out in Johannesburg. You've got a lot of rain that's coming up in these few months. There's also ice that sometimes happens early in the morning. You get to site. Sometimes we climb onto some of our scaffolding or some onto the roofs, and we see this little bit of ice that has already formed because of the cold weather at night that has changed the dew. We also have high wind that often happens in and around our areas. So all of these are what we determine as inclement weather. Now, there's a certain point to how much this will impact us. So weather conditions can obviously change pretty quickly while we're on site. Now, we're not saying from 1 second to the next. Sometimes that does happen, depending on which part of South Africa you're actually in. But what we're saying is because you're so focused on your work and the task in front of you, a few hours might go by and you might not have seen those rolling clouds coming in that is creating a severe weather storm. And severe weather can obviously create this hazardous working environment. So we want to look at wind, lightning, storms, or rain, and then as well as heat. Now, heat is obviously something that we're going to be facing at very regularly now, coming up into our summer months, or already being in our summer months. We're reaching up to 37 degrees out in Hartbeespoort Dam, which means working outside, working on roofs, on scaffolding, on ladders is going to be very dangerous when working in the heat. And so that's something that we need to take into consideration for our employees. But what about just wind? Now, high wind, we know, can cause serious injury and damage. Not so long ago, there was a weather forecast where out in Britain, it was in the 1980s, where the weatherman said that everything was going to be perfect, not serious risk of any dangerous weather conditions. And later that evening, 100-mile winds hit the southeast side of the UK, and it felled almost 1 million trees and killed about 80 people. So that was quite an infamous time, an infamous person as well, who said nothing was going to happen. And then quite a lot of devastation happened. It cost the UK government about £80 billion back then, which in today's time is about £200 billion. Times that by 20 for your exchange rate, and you can see that is a lot of money and damage that high wind actually caused. So that is the instability of structures. If you were working on perhaps a roof, on a ladder, or even a scaffold, or even any temporary structures, the instability of these structures would worsen because of the high wind. Now, on some sites, they will give you a specific kilometer reading. In fact, they'll have wind readings or wind meters set up, and they will constantly check these wind meters to determine whether it's gone over the safety factor. And oftentimes the safety factor is about 30 kilometers an hour. And that's just the general kilometers an hour that we were working on with our sites. And this is purely because of the cranes that we had on site. If the crane's not working, we don't work. That's pretty much how we worked on site. So we always just took a look and see if the crane is not working, that's when we would stop. And normally they would let us know from the principal contractor side. They would also have a siren that goes off. We knew which siren meant what, whether it was an incoming approaching storm for your lightning, because they also had lightning detectors on site. Then the wind meter speed reading also would help us then to determine whether it was safe to work at heights or not. Now, oftentimes you don't see it. Because we cannot see the wind, we can only see the effects of the wind. We might be climbing on a ladder and not actually be able to see what the wind looks like by the time you get to the top of a structure. And obviously we know that when we're on the ground, a wind doesn't affect us as much as when we start getting higher. I mean, the higher we go, the less barriers there are for the wind to, stop from hitting us or hitting our equipment, or even perhaps the materials around us, and lifting that up and causing loads to fall off cranes, loads to fall to the ground, blown materials striking workers, and then perhaps hitting the worker off of an unstable footing. So we can see that the dangers of high wind do exist. It happens on many, many sites, and we've seen it just in normal day-to-day life, where we have force majeure measures in place with insurance. This basically means that when there is a huge storm, then the insurance will pay out for damages because of a major storm that has occurred. And this is because it constantly happens. There's always a place where there's flooding, like we've seen in Durban. We've just seen recently the hurricane that has hit the coast of Florida, and that has caused a lot of devastation. So high winds can have a huge impact if we are not careful while we are working on site. But there are some safety precautions that you can put in place. And the best thing you can do is to be prepared. Now, as we mentioned earlier, that weather forecast said everything was going to be fine. And later that evening, it was not. There was a lot of devastation. So we do need to be prepared. Check your weather forecasts and know what the weather will be like, even just to a degree. What is going to happen, even just to a degree. We might not know 100%, but at least we can be prepared for the worst case scenario. So let's say you take a look at your weather forecast. Perhaps you've got a weather app, and you notice that coming up is going to be 60% chance of rain later on in the afternoon, with wind speeds of about 20 kilometers an hour. And you say to yourself, well, that's still fine. 60% chance. It may or may not happen. With that high wind, it might blow it away. So we can still prepare to do a full day's work. But be cautious. Perhaps take a look and see, is there work that you would do in the afternoon that would be at height, that you could rather do in the morning or earlier in the afternoon in order to get it done before the possibility of high wind or rain or a storm? You see, then the other work that could be done perhaps indoors can be done later. Even if it doesn't rain, at least you were prepared to do that. Now, I know that takes preparation. It takes coordination between contractors on site. One thing must get done before somebody else can work, and they want certain things done at certain times. And so we do appreciate that. And we're not saying that you have to change everything, but there is a possibility. So what must you do if there is high wind and you are not allowed to work? Well, obviously you have to stop all works at a height. You have to stop any lifting, and then you must reassign work. And that's what we meant by, is there a possibility to do the work that may be dangerous during inclement weather while there is no inclement weather? Reassign that work before it happens, so that when it does happen, you are automatically in the assigned work where it is safer to do. Then strap down any materials before running indoors. Store your materials properly so that they are out of the wind, and then secure all your structures. Remember, after any inclement weather, and in this case we're looking at high wind, all scaffolding and temporary works must be re-inspected, because you cannot work or climb onto a scaffold again after inclement weather without it being inspected by the competent person. And in this case, the competent person would be the scaffolding inspector as well as the scaffolding supervisor together. And then if you had a ladder that was set up, if it had been tied or secured, please just re-inspect that ladder. And this would also be done by your ladder inspector. Basically, what this means is anything that was temporarily placed, even your stacks and your storage areas that might be outside that could have been affected by the wind, these all need to be re-inspected after your high wind dangers. Now, another thing that a high wind brings in is obviously your storms, and a lot of storms that happen out, especially out in our area in Johannesburg and Hartbeespoort Dam, are these electric storms. And these electric storms bring a lot of lightning, and lightning can obviously cause serious injuries as well as property damage. So obviously, it goes without saying, no work should take place outside while there is a lightning storm, and especially if this is working at heights. So many people feel that because it's safe to work inside, they can continue on as normal. But if work is to be done inside of a building, there may still be additional risks because of the lightning outside. You see, electrocutions due to perhaps the incorrect cables, poorly insulated or poorly grounded tools could also have an impact on the workers. Because lightning may strike at any time, we also want to make sure that we keep away from areas where there is a possibility for that lightning outside to have an impact on us on the inside. This basically means we must do a proper site inspection. We must be prepared and know and understand what the dangers and the risks are while we are working inside during a lightning storm. What tools are we allowed to use and what are we not allowed to use? And if you don't know this, speak to the safety officer on site, speak to the principal contractor. They must have severe weather plans in place. All construction sites will have a severe weather plan in place. Whether it is lightning detectors, wind speed meters, or even a procedure in place on what to do during severe weather, or what we determine as inclement weather, has to be put in place. Now, for many of us on site, we know the emergency procedures. We know what to do if there is an incident and an accident. But do you know what the severe weather plan is for your site or for your contract? Perhaps you are working on site and you are not on a construction site, and you're working just in a bank, or perhaps you're working in a corporate office. You might not have a severe weather plan. But what you can do is include in your method statement, risk assessment, or even your health and safety policy what to do in case there is severe weather. And it's a good time to be prepared for things like this, because when it happens, it arises very quickly and there will be no time to prepare when that severe weather actually hits us. So employees may experience electrocution and even potential fire during lightning. We understand that there are very high dangers to this, and we want to try and mitigate those dangers as much as possible. So we mentioned this before, a lot of sites, in fact, all construction sites must have proper lightning detectors. So when the season has changed to become lightning, they have to be aware of any approaching storms. Now, these must be regularly checked. They must be inspected. They must be tested to check that they actually work properly. Nobody wants to have any emergency system in place that does not work. So if you do hear the lightning alarm, you must immediately stop work and adhere to the procedure for that lightning protection. So keeping you and your colleagues safe indoors until it is safe to continue working, who is going to determine that? It will always be the emergency coordinator of the site. Now, if you don't know who the emergency coordinator is of the site or of your client, you need to find this out before you start working on site. This generally happens during an induction procedure. So before you go into site, they do an induction on you, and then you find out who is the safety officer, who is the health and safety representative, who's the first aider, the firefighter, the emergency controller. If they are not giving you this information, ask for this information. Keep it readily available, even in your own health and safety files or on your person. If you can, keep it on your cell phones. have an in case of an emergency number for that specific site, even if you're only working on that site once. Remember, there is no better protection when it comes to occupational health and safety than being prepared for something. Because if we are not prepared, even the person with the best intentions is still going to cause incidents or accidents. Now, the third thing we wanted to look at are storms, and that obviously brings rain. Now, rain brings a lot of dangers as well. We understand rains can cause flooding, collapsing of excavations, slippery surfaces. And if you are walking in and around a site or even on around a working environment where rain has hit it, obviously you're going to be able to expose yourself to muddy conditions that can make it very difficult to work. And then that also brings with it the hazard of slipping and falling to the lower level. Now, this can make it very difficult to work, especially if you're in an excavation. And that is why any excavation must be inspected after any rain. And that is because you want to see that it is still safe. You don't want an excavation to collapse because of the soft soil now that has been created due to the rain, or perhaps the slippery surfaces in and around an excavation as well. So the excavation supervisor and inspector will determine whether it is safe to continue to work or not. Perhaps it may need to stop completely until the hazard doesn't exist, until there is no water in it, or maybe it's pumped out first and then it is dried up afterwards. It does mean that work is going to stop. Now, if you don't have any other work, obviously you can leave site and continue on. But if there is other work, why not structure the excavation work as soon as possible? Take a look, be prepared. Have a look at the weather forecast, even to a degree that you know 80% of what the chances are of rain coming morning, afternoon, or later on in the evening. Is there a possibility to change your work to ensure that you get it done before the possibility of rain? Now, what this means, again, is good preparation. You see, having this wet or slippery or muddy surfaces while working is going to cause even minor, insignificant slips and trips, but this could lead to more serious incidents and accidents. And what we want to prevent is any incident and accident. So can you be prepared and do the work before there is a possibility of any rain or any storms affecting your work? Well, here's some precautions. The first thing you want to do is make sure you have the app to check whether severe weather is going to affect you while you are working. There are forecasts that will give you 5 days advance. You have 7 days advance. Some even give you 14 days, but I don't normally trust that. I prefer working on a 5 day. So from Monday to Friday. If you are working over the weekends, you can include then Saturday and Sunday. But I like to take a look at the weekly forecast. In fact, even my phone's calendar has automatically been set up to show me the weather on the day. So if I go onto my calendar in the morning to see what I'm doing, it will automatically show me what the weather forecast is for that day in whichever area I'm actually staying in. And that will then give me a little bit of an idea of what's happening for the day. But even before that, the Friday before the week, I will take a look at the weekly forecast and just see what is coming up for the week. And the reason for that is then I can approach my clients and say to them, the work that we have started to do on certain sites, especially if it's going to be working at heights, working in excavations, or perhaps doing some trenching, we will then encourage them to try and get that done during Monday or Tuesday, because we see weather is going to be changing by Wednesday or Thursday. And oftentimes the clients can then agree, because we've shown motivation from a safety aspect to get it done. And this has immensely improved not just the work ethic for our employers or our clients, but it's also shown the client that we are taking an initiative from the safety aspect. And that is obviously endeared them to the actual clients, because they see that they are concerned about occupational health and safety. Now, we understand that certain sites won't allow this, but can you see the benefit of having more production during a week when we've been prepared, looked at the forecast and seen there is a possibility for severe weather? Let's get the work done earlier in the week. Then when there severe weather does hit Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and you cannot work, there is no production on that site. So being prepared is not only going to help you with a health and safety aspect, but it can also help you with a production aspect. Again, when it comes to storms and rain, all scaffolding and temporary structures must be re-inspected and made safe. Excavations must be inspected and potentially closed off if they are unsafe to work in, especially if they are flooded. Because if somebody falls in there, there could be a possibility of them drowning. And please remember, this is even after you leave the site. You see, once you've left the site, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is no risk or no danger on that site. That hazard still exists. You've just removed yourself from the hazard. But if somebody else were to get onto that site and they were not able to see the excavation being closed, or the barricading was not sufficient enough to stop them from falling in, well, then you could have a huge liability on your hand as well. Then also remember, we've stopped working while it's actually raining outside. Once the rain has stopped, we continue. But the effects of that rain will continue to be a hazard on site. So don't automatically continue working straight after the rain. Have a look out for those slipping environments. Have a look out for those muddy environments, and make sure you re-inspect all your working areas before you go to work. Then what about that extension lead that you are using? Was it laying in water? Did you manage to pack it up before you hit the rain, or perhaps after the rain? Are you setting up your extension cable again, automatically going back to work? And is it perhaps laying in water again? Now, if it's not designed for that, please make sure that you do your inspections. Supervisors, managers, it is your responsibility to have a look at that. And employees, it's your responsibility as well, because you are using those tools that could have an impact on you. Now, when it comes to heat, we fully understand the danger of heat stroke. And if you don't understand it, heat stroke is a condition caused by your body overheating. It usually is a result of prolonged exposure to either physical exertion in high temperatures, and the most serious form of heat stroke or heat injury can occur if your body temperature rises to 40 degrees Celsius or higher. The condition is most common in the summer months. And that is why it's such a big need for us to talk about the danger of heat stroke while working on site. Heat stroke generally requires emergency treatment, because if it goes untreated, heat stroke can quickly damage your brain, your heart, your kidneys, and your muscles. The damage will worsen the longer the treatment is delayed, increasing the risk of serious complications or even death. Now, if you think about it, you are wearing PPE on site, you've got hard hats, reflective vests that sometimes make you sweat quite a lot, even if it's normally in the winter months, they often are very hot. You've got safety boots that are designed to keep your feet safe, but also it's sometimes very claustrophobic in there. And you've got overalls on to try and protect yourself. Then you are working outside on a steel structure, on a scaffolding, performing laborious work, and the temperature reaches 35, 36, 37 degrees. It's not very difficult for us as our bodies to reach temperatures of 40 degrees or higher because of that physical exertion, as well as the hot heat that is outside. Now, this doesn't mean that it's only a person on the outside of buildings, on scaffolding or at heights that can be affected by this. Even a person indoors, if there is no ventilation or no circulation of air to keep that person cool. So there are serious dangers when it comes to heat, especially looking at our summer months that we are into at the moment. And that means that we are not going to handle heat during this Toolbox Talk. We want to have a specific Toolbox Talk all about heat next week, explaining to you why heat stroke is so dangerous and what can you do to prevent heat stroke from occurring. Also, what are the signs and symptoms you could look out for to see, is somebody perhaps going to suffer from heat stroke? Is there going to be a potential for heat stroke? And there are some things that you can look at, some signs that you could perhaps look at to prevent it from happening even while it starts occurring. So we just want to reiterate, heat and the danger of heat stroke is very, very serious. Please take it seriously. And if you know anybody that's affected by it, let them tune in next week, Tuesday, to this Toolbox Talk, or maybe let them listen to the recording even afterwards. You can go and find it on the IOPSA YouTube channel or even on the LMS system after next week, Tuesday. Then we will be looking at Legionella and then the new OHS Act bill that's coming out next year. So our safety thought for this week that we want to encourage you to remember is safety isn't expensive, it's priceless, because it could protect you and your colleagues. Just once again, a very big thank you to all of our attendees for joining us this morning and taking the time out, as well as for yourself always assisting us with these Toolbox Talks. If anybody wants to get in touch, our contact details there on the left-hand side. And again, safety isn't expensive, it's priceless. We'll see you next week, Tuesday.